Hello viewers, welcome to my zoology. In this video, we are going to take a look at the pathway through the respiratory tract. It is the pathway along which the atmospheric air enters our nostrils and then it moves through the nostrils up to the final alveoli present in the lungs for the gaseous exchange. So, I will take you through all such important structures which are present in our respiratory system that helps the air to move through the entire respiratory system. At the beginning, when we inspire in air, it enters the nasal cavity. Then it moves through the back of the throat, which is termed as the pharynx. Here, it may proceed via different pathways. The first one, when we are breathing properly through our nose. In that case, the nasal part through which the air enters is the nasopharynx. But on the other hand, if we gulp in the air through our mouth, in that case, the air enters via the oropharynx. Oropharynx is usually associated with the mouth that goes and connects to the pharynx later. So, usually, the oropharyngeal part begins the process of breathing when it is inspired through the mouth. Then it has to pass through the next common part called the laryngeal pharynx. So you came across three parts of the pharynx. One is nasopharynx, the other is oropharynx, and then the laryngeal pharynx. Now, obviously, you can connect to the next passage, which is called the larynx, because the word larynx was coming at the end where we spoke about the laryngeal pharynx. So, starting from the nasopharynx and then up to the larynx are considered as the upper respiratory tract. This term is of clinical importance because when we visit a chest specialist or an ENT with some breathing trouble, they often categorize the disease as upper respiratory tract problem or lower respiratory tract problem or infection. That is why I categorized that the nasal cavity, the pharynx, and the larynx, they are included under your upper respiratory tract. The external part of the nose bears two nostrils. They are separated by a cartilaginous septum. Here is present in the nostril all throughout, which helps in the entire process of inhalation. Not only here, there are various folds in the nasal cavity called turbinates. These turbinates are lined by mucus and indeed with huge number of capillaries that reach blood to the nasal chamber. These turbinates, they spin the inhaled air very briskly and they tend to throw back the particulate matter out of the system or at least onto the mucus lining when it is possible for us to take the clean air into our lower respiratory tract. The nasal chamber not only filters the air, but it also warms up the air that passes through it because of the presence of capillaries, which brings in blood, and that is at the body temperature. It also adds moisture to the air which enters. This helps in the further absorption of oxygen from the air into the alveolus. So the white cavity at the back of the mouth is pharynx, and then it finally goes to the last portion of the upper respiratory passage, which is the larynx. So this larynx is also popularly called as the Adam's apple, which is a hollow cartilaginous structure located at the start of the windpipe. This is present both in males as well as in females, but it is little extra pronounced in males, which is shown at the onset of adolescence. The next part is trachea. The entrance of the trachea is guarded by a flap called epiglottis, which closes the trachea at the time of swallowing food. An incomplete closure of the epiglottis during swallowing causes cough, because on the other side there is the food pipe through which food may be propelling down, and if it enters into the windpipe called trachea, this will be rejected and coughing will ensue. The trachea, which emerges down the larynx, is strengthened by the C-shaped rings of cartilage which keeps it distended, and these rings provide flexibility and keep the trachea distended permanently so that air can move easily through the main stems of the bronchi. Close to the lungs, the trachea divides into two tubes. Each of these are called the bronchi. As already spoken, so there are two main stems of the bronchi, a left stem and a right stem. The left stem of the bronchi, which partitions the lungs into two lobes, while the right stem of the bronchi partitions the lung into three lobes. Naturally, the one which partitions the lung into three lobes tends to be wider, because the bronchi will then keep branching further approximately 23 times each. These then partition the lungs into those lobes on each side. So on the left side, the lungs is two-lobed, which is just to accommodate the apex of the heart, which is a little tilted towards the left. At each rebranching of the bronchi, they keep forming bronchioles with finer and even more finer branches. Finally, it is found to terminate, forming the smallest air sacs, which are called the alveoli. There are approximately 700 million air sacs in the two lungs. Correspondingly, a few more in the right lungs because it is three-lobed, and a little less in the left lungs since it is two-lobed. So the lower respiratory tract comprises of the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs, which are packed with the alveoli. The airways may tend to collapse when we expire because of the change in partial pressures. But the cartilaginous rings present surrounding them keep them distended and open. But the cartilaginous rings slowly decrease when we move downwards in the respiratory passage. It is in the trachea that the cartilaginous rings are very prominent. But as we move downwards and the airways get smaller and smaller, the cartilage gets replaced by more amount of muscles, which helps in the better flexibility of such airways because muscles lend higher flexibility to such airways. So, the finer bronchioles are entirely lined by smooth muscles, and these impart better flexibility for contraction and relaxation. But when this gets imparted, there is always problem in breathing. Asthma is a disease of the bronchioles where the smooth muscles lining them constricts, but it does not relax very easily. The tightening of the muscles around the bronchioles and the swelling of the tissues in the airways and the release of mucus that tends to block the airways. The lungs occupy a greater part of the thoracic cavity. They are located close to the inner surface of the thoracic wall, and the lower bases they rest closely on a muscular sheet called diaphragm. This diaphragm divides the body cavity into two parts, an upper thoracic cavity and a lower abdominal cavity. When it comes to the two delicate lungs, which is packed up with numerous alveoli, they need protection. The first protection from outside is provided by the rib cage, but inner to it, the lung itself is covered by two membranes. The membrane which is towards the rib cage is called the parietal pleura, and the membrane which is towards the inside of the lungs, that is called the visceral pleura. Both of them are protective in function. This protection is strengthened even higher by the presence of a pleural fluid in between the membranes and the lungs itself. The pleural fluid provides lubrication and also helps in the free movement of the expanding and contracting lungs. It prevents any kind of friction during the movement of the lungs. The alveolus, which are the finest unit structures in the respiratory system, they form a network of blood capillaries surrounding them. So, these blood capillaries make up a wall around each alveolus. The walls of this alveolus are extremely thin, just one cell in thickness, and they always stay moist, thus allowing the gaseous exchange through diffusion. When air is inhaled in, the oxygen from the air first dissolves in this thin layer of the watery fluid which covers each alveoli. Now, the oxygen rich air, which comes via the airways, starting from the nostrils, and finally, when it reaches this alveolus, it brings in the air rich in oxygen. This gets absorbed by the hemoglobin present in the RBCs, which happens in the alveoli. And that is where the inspired air uses the oxygen. Different metabolic processes utilize the oxygen of the blood. Then finally, they accumulate the carbon dioxide and bring it back to the lungs to be delivered out of the body. That too happens through each alveoli, who release the carbon dioxide via the airways and finally outside the body through the process of expiration. Thank you for watching. If you have any queries, you can post them in the comment box. I will attend to them as early as possible. Thank you once again. If you like my video, please do give a thumbs up. Share it with your friends who may find it useful, and do not forget to subscribe if you still haven't done so. Thank you once again.